Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream. Welcome to week 2 of our wonderful Build a Repeatable, Scalable Sales Culture from Scratch workshop series. So excited to have you back. We've got a lot more people actually, in fact, joining us this week, which is very, very exciting. That means you guys liked it last week. You told your friends, you told your colleagues. That's really awesome. Yeah, we'll give a couple minutes for everybody to trickle in here before we really dive into it. But maybe we can get a question going in the chat while we get started. Drew, what do you think? What would we like to know before we get started today?
Well, this has nothing to do with sales, but it's been calling for rain here in Gatineau, outside of like the Ottawa areas where I am,
Mhm.
and all my family members keep telling me that it's like raining where they are. So I'm just wondering if it's raining where you are, or if it's sunny. Because right now it's like
Nice.
overcast. I'm like right in the middle. But is it sunny or rainy where you're coming from?
Yeah, let us know. And let us know where that is as well. I'm curious.
That's a
Is
good
it
call.
rainy and where are you?
Yeah.
Um,
Unless it's somewhere warm and sunny, then I really don't want to know about it because it's like cool and cloudy here. So
it's just not fair. You
it's
just
not
don't need
fair
to
at
rub it
all.
in.
No.
Yeah, it is. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, so also in Canada, opposite side, and kind of like a bright overcast. So looks like it probably won't rain, but it's that really like a strong, almost overexposed, bright overcast.
Yeah, that's nice when it's like that. I mean, it's I feel like
Yeah,
that's like the calm before the storm. So is it sunny where people are? Is it cloudy? Is it rainy?
there is a lot of rain in
Oh,
Cincinnati.
here we go. In Cincinnati, there you go. Home of the
All right,
Bengals,
thanks, Sandra.
if you're a football fan.
What's the weather like usually this time of year for you, Drew? Like, is this classic sort of spring weather or?
Yeah, definitely. It's like we got teased like a couple weeks ago when we were out in shorts and t-shirt.
Mhm.
And then it got like cold again and then warm again and then now it's like right in between where it's like 10 degrees and like it's okay. You have to wear a sweater in the afternoon or in the morning, but then you can take it off in the
Mhm.
afternoon, but then put it back on after
Okay,
dinner.
right.
Confusing weather.
Yes. Looks like sun has set here in Bristol in the UK. Makes sense. Time,
Right
8 hour
on.
time difference. Well, at least from where I am. And it rained yesterday for the first time in about a month. Okay, that's pretty. I would say that's pretty uncommon for Bristol. That's like a good stretch of warm weather. I have some friends that are living in the UK, and most of my family is in the UK, and I had been seeing all of their like social media posts where they're all sitting out in parks because of course a lot of the restrictions have lifted in the UK.
Right.
There was a pretty strict lockdown kind of initially, but now they're absolutely reaping the rewards of that strategy. And they're all out in parks, having drinks outside, on patios, and the weather looked amazing. So that's great. But you need that rain for the flowers that are coming. That's
Yeah, no
always
kidding.
what is it? April showers bring May flowers. So it's
Yes,
okay.
we got
It's okay that
one more
it's
day.
raining now.
One more day of April. And then we'll bring the
Exactly.
flowers.
Exactly, exactly. Cool. Well, we're a couple minutes in here. Why don't we get started with some introductions before we launch right into it for those bunch of new people that are joining us this week?
Sounds good. Hello everybody. I'll get into a little bit more about who I am, but I am Drew, the sales playbook builder Williams, and I help founders transition out of founder-led sales and help them build their sales processes as well as sales playbooks.
And I am Sarah Hicks. I am an SDR manager at Predictable Revenue. And yeah, working with SDRs on execution of all things outbound. So, really excited to learn from an expert in the world of sales playbook building. We've got a lot of cool stuff to cover. Drew, what's the kind of overview for today?
The overview for today is we're going to have a quick overview of just sales processes in general and why they're so important to get them right from the very beginning, because we're talking about building repeatable, scalable sales cultures from scratch. So we're talking about the very beginning, whether you're a founder, an entrepreneur, or a new sales leader, you need to get it right from the very beginning. So we're going to go through the sales process, some good things about it, some things that will happen if you don't get it right. And then what we're going to do is do a little worksheet together. So these are all about workshopping and helping each other out. So we're going to walk through a sales process and actually build out your sales process so that at the end of this, you'll be able to know why you need a well-defined sales process, and you're going to have some action items to go out and actually do it yourself.
Awesome. And we're actually going to share all of these assets with you guys. So everything that we work on today, Drew has put together, compiled into a really great landing page that we will share with you. We've got the link. We can pipe that over to you guys in the chat at the end so that you guys can go away and do this work for your own company. Yeah, really useful stuff that you can apply across your teams, across different departments, share with your colleagues. Yeah, so we'll make sure to share that link with you and make sure that you do click that link at the end and get those assets so that you can try this yourself. But we also have another exciting announcement. Those of you guys who were with us last week, you probably remember a little something about it. Drew, tell us about this giveaway.
I thought you were teasing the other announcement that's going to be. There's so
Oh
many
no.
things to announce. Yeah, so just for registering, appreciate everybody who's here and registered. You're obviously going to get all the worksheets, like Sarah said, all the recordings, and all the notes that we put together here. But also, we have an awesome $10,000 value prize that includes a one-on-one sales playbook build with myself, where we walk through your sales process one-on-one, as well as a deep dive into your ideal customer profile and actually build out the sales playbook for you. So all you have to do is just participate, be with me, and then we actually build the sales playbook for you. And that's obviously part of the charge, or part of the price, so it's no charge.
Awesome. So amazing. And from the predictable revenue side, we're also going to contribute to this prize. So one of the things that we're going to give away is a email sequence consultation. So helping you build that ideal email sequence, and fitting that, of course, into the playbook that you build with Drew. And the other thing that we will give you guys from the PR side is our 2 books. So that's the predictable revenue book, which was the first one, and then From Impossible to Inevitable. So pretty exciting prize, as Drew mentioned, $10,000 value. And you're entered just for being here. So stick around for the rest of our sessions. We've got 2 more after this week, and we will be announcing the winner for that giveaway on May 14th, which is the day after our final session. So, yes, please stick around. But without further ado, let us launch into this week's workshop, which is on how to build your sales process for growth.
Sweet. You can see my screen?
Yep.
Right on. Yeah, so like Sarah said, this is a 4-part. This is number 2. We did one last week. Last week we talked about building a sales playbook in 4 easy steps. So we're sequencing these in a certain way so that you can really have an actionable plan and some awesome worksheets to be able to just go back, do some homework, and build out a full sales playbook that has a sales process, ideal customer profile, deep dive, as well as looking at some onboarding and hiring and KPIs and that sort of thing to bring on your new sales reps or your first sales rep, depending on where you're at. So today we're talking about building a sales process for growth. So make sure you join us. If you didn't see it last week, it's going to be recorded. We'll send you a link,
Mhm.
and then join us next week and the week after, every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific, and everywhere else in between, depending on where you are in the world. Or what is it, 8 p.m. in Bristol? Is that it? So we're
Something
looking at
around
building
there.
your
Yeah.
sales process. Yeah, sales process from for growth. So my gift to you today, I'm here. I want to give as much information as I can. We're going to leave some space for Q&A so we can kind of workshop any ideas that you have, or any problems that you have in your sales process, see if we can help it, diagnose it, that sort of thing. And also just want to give you as much content as we can in the next 60 minutes. So probably spend about 20 minutes going through some information. We're going to workshop together for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A so we can really make sure that this is hyper relevant for you and where you're at right now.
Yeah,
And
quick
like,
suggestion on the Q&A front, because we are going to save some time at the end, but we again want it to be really relevant. I would suggest that you guys, as the questions pop up, pop them in the chat,
mhm.
because that way you don't have to hold your question and kind of think about it, try to remember it till the end. If a question comes up and you want clarification on something, jump in right there. If it is something that we think everybody, like, oh yeah, okay, let's clarify on that point, everybody could use this, I will ask Drew to clarify there. Or if it's something that we can really dive into in the Q&A, I'll save it for then. But I think best bet is to pop the questions into the chat as they come up.
Exactly. If it pops in your head, pop it in the chat, and we'll look after you. So yeah, so my name's Drew. You met me at the very beginning there. Call myself the sales playbook builder because I love doing that, and that's what I do day in and day out, myself and my team. I'm a career salesperson. My very first job outside of working at the restaurant that my mom got me my first job at, started out as an inside sales rep. Did that headphones on, just making 100 phone calls a day, had the big whiteboard writing down our quotas, and probably really like high intensity kind of inside sales. It was all outbound, but it was inside sales. and then moved on to 3M as an outside sales rep, territory rep. So kind of have a few $1 million in a territory, and you're out and about, driving revenue and driving sales for the company. And after that, I felt I've always been entrepreneurial and wanted to do something for myself. It kind of lined up, unfortunately, but fortunately, my brother at the time, he was 23, he got diagnosed with testicular cancer, and went through a bunch of surgeries as well as chemotherapy. And what we decided to do together is start something together. And what we did was kind of harness that passion and kind of that experience. And we created a nonprofit together called Heal for Life, Healthy Everyday Active Living for Life. And we are working with sports teams and schools around promoting men's health, mental and physical. So that lasted for a couple of years. Then funding dried up, so we had to go back to the workplace. And at that time, didn't want to go back to a big Fortune 500 company. I loved sales, wanted to stay into it, and so I decided to jump headfirst into the startup world and tech startup world. So SaaS found me and I found SaaS. And yeah, so then 3 jobs after that, I was the first hire for these SaaS companies, working directly with the founder to drive revenue. One company was based out of New Zealand, one was based out of Toronto, one was based out of the UK. So a lot of responsibility, a lot of different moving parts in that. And it was different than working at the Fortune 500 companies. And it was a little bit different than what I expected, the expectations versus reality. But what really excited me was just the fact that I was working with the founders, and that helped me realize that, okay, founders are really unique people. Entrepreneurs are unique people. And when you start something, you have so much heart and passion into it. When you bring somebody else on to be a customer facing rep for you, it's a little bit challenging because it's hard to give up the kind of the reins, right? Give somebody else a steering wheel. So what I wanted to do is really bridge that gap, be an advocate for those sales reps, the first sales hires, to give them all the information, all the tools that they need to be successful, and also support the founders and entrepreneurs as they're building out their sales process, but also building out their sales team. So that's really simply at the foundation is building out a sales playbook, which includes sales processes. So that's where we're at today. And like I said at the beginning, just here to give you as much as I can. So if you're ready to jump into the first question, let's practice your chatting. Type in blueberries in the chat to make sure that you're still awake, and we'll continue to go if you're all excited to start building out your sales process. We got any blueberries in there, Sarah?
Not yet, but there is like a 20-second lag maybe, so we'll give it a second. I've
So we're going to
contributed
blow
my
up with
blueberries, so
we're going to blow up with blueberries in about 20 seconds.
yes, we should.
So as you're thinking about, or as you're typing out your blueberries, got a question for you. We're thinking about sales processes, right? So you have kind of your marketing, your prospecting, the front end of it, the front end of the funnel, and then you kind of bring your prospects all the way through qualifying, discovery, demo, and then ultimately closing that deal. So I imagine that a lot of you on the call today are selling, whether you're a founder, an entrepreneur, or a new sales leader, or a salesperson, maybe yourself. What do you think is the biggest challenge, or what's the biggest challenge you're having right now when you look at that kind of start to finish of closing and landing deals? What's the biggest challenge you have right now in that process? Is it just responding to all the inbound requests that you're getting? Is it converting demos to close deals? Is it trying to find really qualified buyers and getting them on a call? What's the biggest challenge that you're seeing right now?
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to hear that from you guys. Um, the perspective I have on this is pretty interesting because of the clients that we worked with. Everyone generally has a different challenge, right? That they're each trying to face, and people, every company, every team has their strengths and their weaknesses and their gaps that they're trying to fill. So I'm really curious to hear from you guys, and we have lots of blueberries, so I know there's lots of you guys that are active in the chat.
That's
I'm
good.
really excited to hear from you guys. Like, wow, where do you see that biggest challenge? And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you've not
Not
succeeded
at
at
all.
that particular part of your sales process, because of course, Drew, in your experience, you've worked with a ton of these early stage companies, and you cannot build everything out perfectly right away. You're building it as you go, so it's totally okay that there are some spots that you're trying to work on further. Ashok says converting demos to deals is the
Shock.
biggest
Yeah.
point of challenge for him. Absolutely. And I would say that is probably the most common challenge I think that that a lot of companies have, even late stage companies, forget the early stage, just building out the playbook for the first time. Um, Greg says getting leads to the first call. Okay, Greg, is that inbound leads, like getting the people, you get them coming in and then you call them and you don't kind of get to them on time and they don't answer? Or is it getting those leads that you have, from a data provider or something that you're going outbound to and you're trying to get them onto the first call? Sandra, getting people to answer the phone. Pretty
Mm,
huge, pretty
that's
huge. That
tough.
is a big
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Welcome to the world
Cool.
of sales. That's it. Nobody responds. Nobody answers. Nobody looks at you when you're putting your hand up and waving that you have something awesome for them. It's definitely that's a challenge that I think you'll face and that your team will face forever. That's just the name of the game for sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Any other ones, or should we keep going? And I'll let you know
Let's
some of
keep going.
my biggest issues that I've seen working with these like early stage SaaS companies, early stage startups. Is we don't have a well defined sales process. You have just this like lack of focus, and it might be you as the founder having a million things on the go and just kind of ad hoc picking up the phone or emailing or moving somebody to a next stage, not really having that well defined process. You just have this like lack of focus. So it's like walking into that candy store and it's like you just get a kid in a candy store, you get overwhelmed. And so you just start kind of grabbing things here, grabbing things there, grabbing things there. And it's just not focused enough to like produce any results. So that's one of the biggest, the first challenge, let's say, is the lack of focus. The second, you might think there is a process in place, and whether it's you or your team, that process is, if it's not well defined and documented, then it's probably fragmented. So you might have a couple people doing a few different things, and when that happens, you don't have everybody on the same page, and you just have one person doing one thing, another person doing another thing, and there's no alignment. And it really is a challenge for the organization to kind of get through that process. So people just kind of create their own, and all of a sudden you don't have one process, you have 10 different processes, and it becomes extremely fragmented and challenging to actually pull prospects through a process when it's all fragmented. And the third challenge that I see is you really don't get any meaningful data when you're trying to assess those challenges that we asked you at the very beginning. So when we asked you about those challenges in your sales process, you might be just guessing. It might be from some sort of data that you pulled, but I would probably imagine that you just kind of had a gut feeling that, you know what, the hardest part is getting discovery calls to go to demos or converting demos to closing. But it's one of the reasons is because you don't have a well-defined sales process. You're not able to kind of backtrack to say, okay, we're not getting to our revenue goals of where we want to get to. Let's rewind the tape along that process to see where in fact we're missing, where we're not following up, or where we're having drop-offs, or we're having no-shows. So you don't have any meaningful data because you're not able to isolate kind of one variable. So really you're just guessing and gambling in that case in terms of where you're actually where your issue is. So your issue that we heard, or the challenge that we heard at the beginning, might not actually be getting someone to go from demo to close. It might be actually qualifying them in the first place, because they might be ready to buy today. They might be ready to buy in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. But if you have let's say a 2-month sales cycle, you need to be qualifying people to that demo so that they're closing within 2 months. And when you rewind that, you can kind of isolate that discovery piece and say, okay, that is where we're actually lacking, not so much on this end of it. So when you have that well-defined sales process, you're able to isolate those kind of individual pieces.
Hmm.
And when you have the well-defined sales process lined up right, it just acts like these dominoes where you just kind of knock down the first one and then all the way through, nice and smooth process. And you get this like really focused approach where you're not guessing, you're really just you're focused on that approach and that process of going from taking your lead and your prospect from the start to the finish. There's no fragments, there's no unfocused. You know exactly what the next step is. I can tell you from my experience, I remember it was a little bit about focus, but also just a little about knowing about what that next step was. And when I was working in my first SaaS company as a sales rep, I was in there and we had a little bit of a process, but it wasn't documented. So I was making my cold calls, ended up picking up a cold call, running a demo on that same call. And I remember this was my first sale. And so the woman on the other end of the call said, yeah, I'd love to sign up. And so I said, I'm like, okay, I'll call you back, because I didn't know what the next step was. It was never it wasn't
Right.
documented anywhere. Nobody told me during the training or onboarding what the next step was in order to like sign up that person. So I had to hang up. The founder was sitting beside me. I'm like, how do we sign up customers? So he told me, we documented it, called them back. Luckily they signed up, but that might not have the same outcome for you if you don't have that well documented. Um, Also, when you get this up and running, you have a nice, well-defined sales process. It becomes this machine. So it takes a lot to get going. And as we heard from the challenges at the beginning, it's a lot to get this machine going. And it takes a lot of heavy lifting at the very beginning. But once it gets going, you're able to plug people into this process, because you know you have this defined process, you have your ICP, you have all the plays along, you're able to plug people in, and then this engine keeps on running. So then you might hire one SDR, you might hire two SDRs, and then in a year you might hire an AE to backfill one of those SDRs, and then hire another SDR. You might just hire a couple SDRs to kind of to free up your time as a founder to kind of act as the AE at that time. But the whole point is that you're getting a sales engine that's running, and you don't have to necessarily worry about it too much because you have the confidence in that process, in that engine. And the last um, real benefit of having a well-defined sales process is, going back to that data piece, is having the ability to diagnose and improve those steps along the way, and knowing where to improve and where to fix, let's say. So if you have a well-defined sales process, your reps or yourself are following that, and you go back and look at the metrics and look at the numbers, you're able to kind of go backwards, like I was saying before, and find out exactly, diagnosing where the problem is, because you know that there's a consistent path and a consistent process. You can kind of isolate one of those variables, which is your demos, your email sequencing, whatever it may be, and tweak it so that you can improve it and do those little micro experiments to then diagnose and improve that actual sales process. So quick little chart here. If you were, so everybody out there, if you're running a business or you're part of a business, here's, you got time on the bottom, you got revenue on the left-hand side. Which company would you want to be? Would you want to be the blue company who's going from 1 million to about 5 million ARR in 5 years? Or do you want to be the green company that's going from 1 million to about 9 million ARR in 5 years? Comment blue or green in the chat. I can kind of guess who you'd want to be. What do you think, Sarah? Which company would you want to be, blue or green?
I think green. I think I'd rather be green.
That's wise. That's wise. Is everybody else being just as wise as you?
I'm sure they are, but there's a little bit of a delay. But I imagine there's going to be a lot of greens coming in the next couple seconds here.
Sweet. So Harvard Business Review did a research study, and they found that companies that had a well-defined sales process grew about 20% faster than companies that didn't have a well-defined sales process. So if you were at $1 million ARR, and your company green and company blue is at the same stage, you're going to be that much further ahead. In this case, it's like $3 to $4 million after 5 years, just by having a well-defined sales process. So it's super important to have it, to define it, and to really improve it over time. I'm curious, is everybody, too, if we throw in the chat, just had a quick question. Thinking about a defined sales process, do you have a defined sales process, or is it kind of gut or guessing? Just type it in the chat, because I'm curious to know, because a lot of people, especially when you're starting out, you might have a sales process in your mind, but you don't actually have it documented. So do you currently have a sales process that you're following, or is it something that you're just kind of guessing, let's say? So put in either follow or guess, or any other info that you want to give there. But I'm just curious to know if people have a defined sales process, or if they're just kind of doing it ad hoc.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know as well. I feel like it's sometimes somewhere in between that as well, where certain parts of that sales process are really well defined, and then there's other parts that are left to guesswork, like parts that maybe we don't think we need to document, parts that we think are maybe common sense or something. But then if you were to onboard somebody brand new, like that example that you gave, and put them in the seat and tell them to do the job, would they get somewhere and then go like, what am I supposed to do here? Yeah, so I'm curious to know what you guys have. What are you working with? follow, a shock follow. Nice. Something documented that's being followed there on that
Awesome.
team. Very good. Very good. That's all we got for now. So oh, here
Sweet.
we go. Greg, half and half. Writing bits down, but other bits are not yet captured. Yeah, interesting. I think that's probably a really common place for people to be sitting is the pieces that you think are like maybe the most important or the highest value get documented quicker than those other pieces, but altogether it's having that complete sales process that will give you that 20% advantage over your competition.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. You're right, sir. Like there probably is a lot of like hybrid where you have a couple things that are documented. You might have like an email sequence documented, but you might not have the entire flow or sales process documented. And yeah, it's super dynamic and just kind of changes as you go. So we're talking through this 4-part series, talking through kind of this idea, this model around like a sales playbook accelerator. So the first last week, what we did is talk about the 4 steps for sales playbook building, which was these 4 steps here: audit, align, assemble, accelerate. Today, we're going to be focusing on a sales process. And then next week, we're going to be talking about your ideal customer profile and really building relationships and driving revenue through empathy. So I just wanted to take a step back to let you know where we're at. So let's dive into the sales process. So when you're thinking of building out your sales process, I think of it in kind of a 3-part, 3 steps, let's say. So the first step is mapping, which is what we're going to do together. Second step, what you want to do is document. And then third step, we're looking at assign. And I'll give you some detail in just a second. So when we're looking at mapping your sales process, there's a couple things to think about, or a couple processes to think about actually mapping out. So the first one is your sales process, which is what we're going to be kind of focusing on today. But at the same time, you can't just build out a sales process without thinking about your buyer and the ideal customer profile, because no matter how great your process is, if it doesn't reflect the way that your buyers buy, it's not going to work. So whenever you're mapping out your sales process and thinking of how are you taking prospects from entering your funnel to closing the deal at the end, you have to really focus and always keep in mind that buyer's journey. And when I say buyer's journey, just thinking of like how those buyers buy. Do they have a is it one person that's buying? Do they buy over the phone? Do they have a credit card? Do they have to have a PO? Do they have a group of people that are buying? If it's a nonprofit, do they have a board meeting that they have to sit through? So think about all those steps as you're building out your sales process, because what you want to do is facilitate that buying journey, not just take them through a sales process. Second piece is documenting. So what we want to do is once we have our sales process lined up, which we'll go through in just a minute, what we want to document next is some enablement resources. So enablement resources such as looking at like a discovery call flow or a demo script, recordings of either of those, email sequences, email cadences, handoff from SDR to AE, any of these resources that you can support your sales reps with and support them thriving and really like winning in the marketplace. These are resources that you're going to be building out in order to like support that sales process. And then the other piece that you're going to be documenting is the people. So who is responsible for each step in that sales process? And it might just be you right now, might be just kind of founder from start to finish. But eventually, as you're building out the team and scaling the company, you think about that succession of looking at, okay, SDRs, AEs, are they going to handle the discovery and the demo? Are they going to kind of do everything at once? So it's a little bit challenging, but it's something to think about as you're documenting that sales process. So think about the resources as well as the people that are going to fulfill that actual process. And then finally, what we're going to do is thinking about that diagnosis and data. We're going to be assigning some KPIs to each of the steps so that we can really do a good job of diagnosing and assessing where we can improve in that process and get to our revenue goals. And we're also going to be assigning some measures. So we have the KPIs, which is what we're measuring, and then how we're actually going to measure it. And sophisticated teams, you have your CRMs and your dashboards and reporting. You might be just building out some measures in Excel to align those to your KPIs, which is totally fine. It really doesn't matter. As long as you have your sales process documented, you have some KPIs associated with it that you're measuring, and then you have a way of tracking it, whether it is your CRM or an Excel. It's completely up to you, but you want to have those pieces in it. So we're going to work together. I'm going to get Sarah's help, and I'm going to get your help too, is actually mapping this out. So this is a worksheet that is going to be available after our call. It's going to have our notes on it. And there's two ways of completing it. You can either draw on it, you can use sticky notes to map it out, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to use a virtual sticky note platform called Stormboard, and we're actually going to map this out. Any questions that are coming up in the chat before we start building together? Sarah, anything you
Nothing
wanted
yet.
to add or add to in terms of like this whole like the buyer's journey, sales process, that sort of thing of what you've seen with teams?
I don't think so, but I guess my one question would be where, because we've got the measure, the KPIs on the one side, and then we've got the resources on the other side. And of course, something like a CRM is sort of both, right? Like it can house, it sort of documents or acts as an enablement tool at the same time as being the place where those things live. So where in the process or where in this little triangle do you see something like the CRM living?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you could almost say that like the the CRM is like just like right in the middle.
Mm,
Because it encapsulates and includes all of those things that you just mentioned. So you have like your KPIs can be tracked in the CRM, the measures.
mhm,
You can use the CRM as your measuring tool. And then when you think of your sales process in your CRM, you can build out those stages to reflect your actual sales process. And obviously, depending on how sophisticated the CRM is, you can even include some sales enablement resources to help like pop up or remind you before the
mhm.
call of competitive information or any sort of notes that you've added to the CRM to help you out. So yeah, it's a great point, and the CRM does a great job of kind of bringing that all together. So you have your playbook, and then you have your CRM, which is kind of the more actionable piece, depending on what tool you're using to kind of bring this all together.
Cool. Yeah, that was my only question. No questions from the chat, so we can get right into it.
Sweet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop over to Stormboard. And what we're going to do is you can see the Stormboard, the little
Mhm.
in there. Perfect. So we're going to take an example. Let's pick HubSpot. I feel like everybody's very familiar with HubSpot. And what we're going to do is kind of like close our eyes and pretend HubSpot. You just started HubSpot. You're the founder of HubSpot. You've been working at it for about a year. You're at $1 million in ARR, and you're about to hire your first sales team. And you've already chatted with predictable revenue, and they've got a couple SDRs lined up for you. But what you have to do is get your sales playbook and your sales process, all this documented. So together, I'm going to ask you, just thinking about that scenario. So you're the founder, you're building out your sales process to document this. So we start from the very beginning, which is the prospecting piece. You can also include marketing in there. And we go all the way to onboarding. And what we're going to do is just map out the journey if you were to
Mhm.
become a HubSpot customer. So, Sarah, and if in the chat, feel free to pop in any suggestions as we go along. But I'll get you to play along, Sarah. I'll voluntold you. So what do you think in terms of HubSpot? What would you like? Where do they get their leads from? Um,
Yeah, so we'll say, of course, yeah, there's inbound versus outbound. So the inbound comes in through ads, through landing pages, through content, webinars. Yeah, those are kind of the umbrellas, I would say, of where those inbound leads come from. And then outbound, there must be a data provider or a research team that is getting those leads, or maybe the SDR is even tasked with it. If it's an early stage company, maybe it's a bit of like manual list building that's going on. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're either using a data vendor or building those lists in house. But um, they've got to get the data from somewhere. And then I see, yeah, social outreach that you've got in there. So yeah, if it's LinkedIn prospecting, then it's like you've got a built-in data provider there that you can just reach out to the people that you connect with, or connect with people as a kind of first stage of your outreach.
Yeah, perfect. So, and I guess for this example, what we're really focusing on is outbound, because it's a little bit different on the inbound and conversions and that sort of thing. But let's, this is great because you might have some down kind of focused cadence and outbound sales motion. So let's say we have a list, we have a bunch of prospects that we're going to go reach out to. What would be the next step once we have that list? What would the
Putting
sales rep
them
be doing or the founder be doing?
putting them into the sequence or the cadence that they have, and whether that is, if you've got an enablement tool that they can plug it right into, like Outreach, Salesloft, something like that, HubSpot in a certain context, or if it's just all manual, but there's like a process that's written out in an Excel sheet or something, saying like this is what email one looks like and when you send it, so on and so forth. But the sequence is the first place that contact lands.
Right. So now we got a sequence going out to them. There might be some back and forth. Let's say maybe some questions that are a bit being asked of the sales rep or the founder, and now they get to the point. What are we trying to get to them after we've made some outreach, made some connection? What's the next step? What are we trying to get them to? I'm guessing it's going to be a discovery call. Like if we're just kind of making this up, I'm imagining that HubSpot has some
Mhm.
sort of discovery call and then demo. So I'm just going to put discovery call. And then typically what you see after the discovery call is like they're either qualified or not qualified. So I
Mhm.
see kind of two paths after that. So let's just say qualified, not qualified. And we're laying this out in a linear fashion. We're being fairly simple in this example, but it could get complicated. You could have a couple other arrows, but the idea is to just kind of get your ideas, get this process of what's working for you and what you're doing right now onto paper, so then we can go back and improve it and look at different places of what we're missing. So after the discovery call, let's say they're not qualified. What would we do with them then?
Well, if they're not qualified because it's not the right time, but potentially they could be in future, you're going to pop them into a nurture sequence so that you can revisit that in a month, a year, whatever that looks like.
Okay.
Or there's a potential other piece where if that person is completely out of the realm of what you could help with, that's something that needs to go right back to the very beginning so that you don't have more of those types of contacts landing in your sequences. So if that means like excluding a certain persona from your data lists or whatever, you got to go back to the beginning and make sure you don't get a bunch more of those.
Cool. Um, so now they're qualified. This is super exciting. We got on a discovery call. They're qualified. They're really interested in using HubSpot. Now we got our next stage. So after they're qualified, let's say there's some sort of follow up. There's also a handoff because in our team we have an AE, which is super exciting. No, in this situation, we have a sales rep, but then we also have the founder being the kind of acting as an AE to do
Closer.
the
Mhm.
demo. Exactly. So we have the handoff, and then we have a demo. So then we take them on a demo of HubSpot, and we show them all the awesome things that HubSpot can do for their company. And then post demo, what do we do at post demo?
More follow up.
Mm-hmm.
And this I think this is where your kind of sales cycle comes in, because if it's like a massive big deal where you've got to incorporate those multiple buyers in like a buying committee, you've got to loop them in. Or if it's more simple, it's just the follow up and the kind of the verbal and eventually signing the contract. So yeah, follow up of various kinds, making
Yeah,
sure
let's
that
keep
you've
it
got
simple. You're
that
right.
ultimate
Yeah,
decision maker.
yeah, because it totally depends on, like, if you're an enterprise sale, then you might have you might have like 2 or 3 other demos. You might just have one demo with kind of your champion in the organization. You might have a couple stakeholder demos with
Mhm.
multiple people. So you're right. There's a bunch of different kind of directions you can go. So when you're doing this as part of your homework and you're building out your sales process, we're giving you an example, but we're giving an example of going through the process. But yeah, feel free to add in like what really makes sense for you and how you're
Mhm.
selling your product today. So we got verbal commitment, and let's say there's a proposal sent, and then proposal accepted. Sweet. And now we can move on to onboarding. Um, and then again, there might be one other handoff in here to customer success.
Mhm.
Does that look good?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have our sales process. So one of the points is getting this down and writing it out so you see it on paper. Another point is to stay true to it. So when we talked about having a well-defined process, now you have to follow that well-defined process in order to be able to diagnose where you're winning and where you're not winning during that. So first step, document it. Second step, follow it. And third step, keep following it. Cool. Let me know if there's any questions in the chat. If you have any questions about this kind of process or what yours might look like, or anything else about the sales process, like feel free to pop it in the chat as we kind of move on to this like sales enablement resources. So if you think of, so now what we want to do is have a look at, okay, so we have all these like steps in the sales process. How are we supporting the sales reps, and how are we supporting the sales process at each of these stages? So when we take a look at, let's say, discovery call specifically, discovery call as well as demo. So pop in the chat, what do you think would help your salesperson if you hired somebody and you said to them, here's our sales process. We go discovery call all the way to handoff to customer service. What would you give them to support them in their discovery calls to know whether somebody's qualified or not qualified? And also, what would you give them and provide to the sales reps for their demos and for follow-ups?
Yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys say. Yeah, because it's another there's variables, right? Like back to the what we were chatting about around the kind of follow-up process in between when you do that demo all the way to the close. Everybody's going to kind of have different collateral to support their team depending on the complexity of what they're selling, who they're selling to, um, whether it's a product or service, kind of all these different things factor into what you might provide your sales team with to really have the best shot at closing these deals.
Yeah,
We'll
so
give a couple
feel free to
seconds
shout out
here.
if you see anything in the chat. But
Mhm.
when you think of a discovery call, okay, or qualification, qualified versus not qualified. So how about some qualification criteria? That would be helpful if you were a sales rep walking in, because you're thinking these are new people coming into your company. They don't know this process. You're introducing it to them for the very first time, and so you need to give them as many tools as you can to support them in that journey. So, qualification criteria number one. How about discovery call? I don't really call them scripts. I just call them flow. You can call them script if you want, but it's more of just kind of an idea of like some bullet points or suggested questions.
Mhm.
I'm going to say some objection and handles, so common objections and how to handle those. That would definitely help out that sales rep during those initial discovery calls. What do you think from like a demo perspective and like follow up? What would be helpful, Sarah, to give to those reps to empower them and enable them in that piece of the process?
Yeah, with the demo, there's definitely it's very helpful to have that kind of visual aspect to it. The kind, especially if it's a product that we're talking about and we're doing an actual product demo, whether it's sharing screen and walking people through it in kind of a set way, or whether it's a deck of things that we're showing them. But yeah, some sort of visual support for um, actually demonstrating demo
Yeah.
what you're showing. Ashok said one of the things that is important in that qualification discovery piece is laying a finger on the budget owner. So, yeah, how do you support your sales reps in basically letting them know who the ultimate decision maker usually is and how you can figure that out? When you have that initial call, because yeah, lots of cases maybe we speak to anybody manager and above, but we're not sure exactly who's going to be the final decision maker at this company. Greg says,
Great
how to
question.
find
Great
out if
idea.
the prospect has any money to buy. Yeah. So if that falls under what you count as your like qualification criteria, if you're using these things like BANT, or whether it's just a different question that you have worked into your own qualification criteria, does budget factor in? How do you ask that question?
Yeah. And
Nice.
those are all great things. Yeah. Those can all fit into like qualifying criteria. They can also pop into objections or commonly asked questions. Great suggestion. So the idea here is we're looking through the process. So now we got our process. Now we know what we're going to create in order to, or document what we have in order to support our future reps in each of these stages. And you'd want to go through each of them. We just really talked about discovery and demo, but you'd want to go through each step in pretty good detail and just write down what you think that rep or your team would need when they are kind of in battle, when they're talking with customers, in order to help them get from one step to the next step. So once you've documented all those resources, you might want to go back to last week's webinar and look at auditing what you currently have, because you might have some of these, but you might have to build out a few. So what I often see is um, you might have a demo script and your demo questions and your, like Sarah said, your presentation deck and a demo environment, but you might not have recorded any of these. And recordings of demos, especially at early stages, is a huge asset and a huge enablement tool for new reps. So that might be something you document what you have, but then in the future, you're going to build out those recordings. The next piece is assigning. So we just quickly will assign people and KPIs, and then we'll just open up for some Q&A. So in this case, you might be just completely founder-led sales, which is totally fine. So then what we would say, let's say founder. So in that case, you'd kind of be founder all the way along. Eventually, so a lot of the companies that I work with, they're founder-led sales, and then all of a sudden they get so busy that they're booking out discovery calls and demo calls like weeks in advance, and they are now at a point where they need to hire an SDR or a couple SDRs. So in this case, we might assign, as we're getting closer to hiring those SDRs, we might kind of bring the founder's role, minimize or bring it a little bit down the pipeline, and add in the SDR at the front end of it. And eventually, as you're building out your team, you might have a couple SDRs at the front. The AEs might be handling the demos and the closing, depending on how your team is looking and growing. This is kind of assigning these team members as you're building out that process, and just gets you to think of the future of what that process might be. And then we can pop in a couple KPIs. So when we're looking at, let's say, sequencing, so email sequencing after you're sending out these like those cold outreaches, what are some KPIs that you look at, Sarah, for teams
Yeah.
at this
So
kind of front end of the funnel?
definitely. So there's the volume of outreach. So whether that's email, phone, yeah, what amount of tasks are you kind of completing, or activities are you completing to get to then the following KPI, which is those first meetings. So when we're talking about this SDR who does that qualification piece and then hands off to the account executive, they have to first book meetings for themselves, and then a certain percentage of those they're going to be able to convert into a discovery call or a demo or whatever comes next with that account executive.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So I think you get the idea here, where we're just looking at assigning some KPIs so that we can measure and then again properly diagnose, so that if we don't hit our revenue goal, if we are crushing our revenue goal, whatever it may be, you're able to pinpoint. You can say, you know what, we have this many we need to make this many outreaches, this many touches in order to get this many discovery calls, and we need to qualify this many people in order to get this many demos, and then this many demos in order to get this kind of revenue goal for the year. So this helps to break down your KPIs. It also helps to build in as part of your compensation and quota and metrics for your new reps. So that's the process, kind of 4 steps. In here are 3 steps. We look at building out your process, assigning or documenting your enablement resources, and then assigning people and KPIs to each of those steps. So once you've done all this, then you're able to really have a solid understanding of your current sales process, and you can also have that well-defined sales process that aligns with your buyer's journey in that particular case.
Nice. Very, very useful. Ashok mentioned that something that is difficult, and in his case, it's enterprise sales. So he was the one who suggested like laying a finger on who the actual budget owner is in this
Yeah.
enterprise sort of buying committee, and that becomes quite challenging. And then a kind of continued challenge, the duration of that sales process is, even if you've got the internal champion, navigating the hierarchy within that company, figuring out who you're supposed to pull in, how and when, and that of course is a complex thing to map because it might be a case by case type of thing. So what are your suggestions for, yeah, building out that the sort of demo onward flow within your sales process for these type of complex enterprise sales?
Right. So we're specifically talking about enterprise sales where you're going to have more than one buyer or like more than
Mhm.
one person involved in the actual decision making process. So yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, I would still what I would do is you might have to add a couple layers to that sales process. So you might think, because when you're building out a sales process, again, you're thinking about the buyer's journey. So in your case, or in this case, you have multiple buyers, let's say multiple decision makers. So when you're mapping out that sales process, you might want to have a second layer where you can map out a couple different people and a couple different stakeholders, their actual buying journey. Because they might be
Mhm.
buying differently, they may be asking different questions. So when we look at those, let's say, sales enablement resources, you might have commonly asked questions from this buyer, commonly asked questions from this buyer. So it definitely adds a layer to it. But what I would suggest is just get a baseline of like what you're doing from start to finish, and then layer on those complexities as you think about those different buyers in their different roles and how they buy.
Yeah, interesting. And then there's probably place for where you see those two or multiple buying journeys sort of intersect, because you're not always going to have these separate conversations. And actually, something that would be really helpful, I'm sure, Ashok, if Veronica or Mara, if one of you guys could grab a link for Ashok to our podcast episode with Nick Sigelski. He has some great strategies on how to basically loop in and involve everybody in that buying process without like tripling your workload. So I think that one is something that you could find really helpful. Greg asks Drew, how would you approach mapping if the sales process is more consultative?
The same way, there's still a process, because when we look at I'm assuming, so the questions around, okay, if we have a consultative process, is there's still a process that you're taking somebody through, because if you don't have a process that you're bringing somebody through, then you're kind of relying on them and you're kind of putting it in their hands and you're losing a lot of control. You want to understand their buying journey, their decision making, their process of researching and understanding who you are, your company, and then ultimately how they actually buy. And doesn't matter your style, doesn't matter, like Sarah, you're talking about Bant, and doesn't matter if you're Sandler trained or Challenger focus, like whatever it may be, those all have places in here. We're really taking one step back to take a look at what's our process, what are we taking people through, not necessarily what are we saying to them and how are we saying it to them. That's kind of a different thing. That's more around training and coaching about how you're actually executing that journey. So I would say it's the same thing. um, just it's still a process that you're taking somebody through.
Mhm. And then that would be a great time to, along the resource front, have those like commonly asked questions, or what you need to know, what people generally need to know before they can make a decision, or um, yeah, those types of things can definitely be documented, because although each consultative journey will be slightly different, they can't be that different. If you're selling to like similar ish personas and selling a similar ish product, service, whatever it might be, um, you still have your sort of realm of expertise, and you're helping people solve the same challenges or achieve the same outcome. So you will probably end up, as if you mark down all those questions every time they're asked, you'll find eventually that like themes of questions emerge, and that's great. That's a great asset, whether it's for you or for if an account executive or somebody else is going to take that on. you can build those resources around that.
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions, guys? Those were really great questions. Let's have a look here. Nothing yet, but I'm curious to know, Drew, what do you think the most challenging part is of building the sales process? Where do the hiccups come in? What's the hardest?
The hardest in terms of actually just like writing it out and building it out, or you're saying like
Yeah.
what's the hardest step? Is it the hardest step, or just kind of like what's the challenge in actually building? Because if it's about just writing it out, it's just actually doing it the first time.
Right.
Because I mean, just setting aside 30 minutes at least to just say, okay, I'm going to block off 30 minutes this afternoon. And because again, we're talking about building a foundation for a repeatable and scalable sales culture. And you can't have repeatable, scalable anything without process. You can't just bring in a bunch of people that do their own thing, that are going after different customers, that are
Mm-hmm.
talking differently, that are not on the same page. You need alignment. You need to bring everybody together. So actually just writing it down and getting it documented is the biggest challenge, I would say, from just a process perspective.
Yeah,
Because you have
absolutely
a
makes sense.
process, like you do have one. If people have bought your product, your service, whatever you're selling, if they've bought it, they went through some sort of process, whether it was documented or not, doesn't it, like it's still, they went through a process in order to buy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Yeah, I can see why that would be kind of that's the painstaking part. It's going out and getting it documented, but it's one of these things where maybe it's a little bit of front-loaded work, but the benefits and the rewards and kind of the time that you're saving forever after that is huge. So the the benefit is huge to just setting aside that time and putting in the effort to do it now, because then as things grow, like the team grows, things get more complicated, all you're doing is sort of adjusting, incorporating some new things, iterating, versus having to build the whole thing from scratch, when it's much bigger, much more complicated. And if you've grown the team and now there's all these, like you mentioned, these fragmented processes that emerge,
Mm-hmm.
get it done before that. Get it done so that it's all kind of unified and centralized before you start having each of these individuals coming up with their own way of doing things. And then you're just working hard to kind of harness it all back in.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. So I will say, let's give a little preview on what is coming up in the next two workshops.
Next two workshops. So yeah, next Thursday and then the following Thursday, we're getting into May. So we're going to bring some flowers, and we're also going to bring some empathy. So we're going to bring some empathy to our sales process in really connecting with your ideal customer profile. So we're going to do a deep dive in ideal customer profile next week. And then the following week, exciting, because we're going to have our sales playbook built. We're going to have our sales process. We're going to have our enablement resources. We're going to get our KPIs. We're going to have a targeted ICP, ideal customer profile. And now we can think about actually building our team and bringing on that one or two new sales reps, or going from 3 sales reps to 5 sales reps, whatever it may be. So looking at hiring, onboarding, training, kind of bring it all together. That's going to be in 2 weeks. So next week, it's all about ideal customer profile and making sure that you know exactly who you're talking to and you can get into their shoes and really empathize and connect with them.
Awesome. Cannot wait. We had Veronica very kindly drop in the chat that Nick Sigelski episode of the podcast where he talks about engaging those multiple decision makers. So Ashok, please have a listen to that, because I'm sure it'll be really useful. Don't forget that on May 14th, we are going to announce the winner to that wonderful giveaway that we chatted about at the beginning. So stick around for the next 2 sessions so that you are entered in that giveaway and have a chance at winning that wonderful $10,000 prize. And Drew, if people want to learn more from you, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, and it's $10,000 worth of services. Just so everybody
Yes.
knows, it's not a $10,000 prize. We're not handing out a $10,000 check. That would be really
Yes.
nice. You got to work for that one. That's your commission check that you're working towards. Yeah. So if you want to, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Drew Williams, Sales Playbook Builder, and also I've got a bunch of frameworks and resources on my website, salesplaybookbuilder.com. You can just hop over there, and if you're building out your team, there's some frameworks for onboarding, for KPIs and measuring, building your playbook, all sorts of things. So yeah, salesplaybookbuilder.com, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or follow up. Would love to help.
Nice, perfect. And we will make sure to include the link in the chat as well, to those assets that we mentioned. So everything from the first episode and from today, all of those worksheets that you can work on yourselves. We're going to drop the link to that landing page where you can find all of those things. And on the predictable revenue front, we have something exciting in the works. I already teased it last week, but I'm going to tease it again one more time because we're actually going to announce what it is next week. So please stay tuned. But we're preparing something pretty exciting. There are going to be some pretty big guests joining us for this secret thing that I won't say what it is until next week. We're going to have Nick Capozzi with us. We're going to have Aaron Ross, predictable revenue man himself, and we're going to have Mark Roberge joining us. So some really big guests, a bunch of other really exciting guests as well. So please stay tuned for next week for that announcement. But that is all from my side. Looking forward to seeing you guys on the line again next Thursday, same time, same place. Drew, thank you for joining us again for a wonderful workshop. So yeah, so much to learn here, so much to kind of take on and try on our own. So very exciting stuff. Thank you.
Anytime. We'll see you next